Ma'am, that's not how you torque the engine bolts on a combat aircraft. The secure military device in Rebecca Morrison's tool belt buzzed with the distinct tone that could reshape national air defense protocols in minutes. "I'll adjust the torque specification immediately, Captain." Her voice carried the practiced deference of someone who'd spent 3 weeks maintaining aircraft for pilots who had no idea she commanded the entire American air operations system. What Captain Jake Maverick Collins didn't know was that the blonde mechanic adjusting his F-16's engine outranked him by 3 stars and was about to receive a call that would change everything. Click. Collins tapped his flight helmet against the metal tool cart, the sound echoing through Nellis Air Force Base's main hangar. "And next time, make sure maintenance staff understands that fighter jets require precision, not guesswork." Rebecca's fitted blue coveralls and form-fitting work pants had drawn appreciative glances all week. At 34, she maintained the athletic build that came from years of military aviation training, though none of the pilots watching her work suspected she'd earned her expertise commanding air operations across 4 different theaters of war. The Pentagon Air Command pager buzzed again. "National Airspace Emergency Escalation." "Captain, I understand the importance of precision," Rebecca said quietly, her blonde hair catching the hangar's fluorescent lighting as she leaned over the engine. "Aircraft maintenance can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure." That's when the emergency pager rang with the tone that would expose everything. "Stories like this prove that heroes command from every position in our military. Tell us where you're watching from. What city, state, or country?" Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had been watching the new maintenance specialist for 3 days now, and something felt inconsistent. It wasn't obvious at first. Rebecca Morrison moved through Nellis Air Force Base's main hangar with practiced efficiency, her fitted coveralls flattering her athletic figure while maintaining professional boundaries. Blonde hair pulled back during procedures, nothing suggesting she was anything more than what she appeared. But Santos had 15 years of aircraft maintenance experience, and she'd learned to recognize specialized training. The way Rebecca handled F-16 components wasn't random. She used protocols most maintenance staff never learned. When she performed engine diagnostics, she employed procedures that suggested advanced aeronautical engineering training. When she moved through the crowded hangar, she navigated with the spatial awareness of someone who understood flight operations and air traffic management. Most telling was how she assessed aircraft systems. Rebecca Morrison saw everything. Not obviously, she never overstepped her apparent role as maintenance specialist, but Santos noticed her unconsciously evaluating flight readiness with diagnostic precision. Yesterday, when Captain Collins discussed mission parameters, Rebecca had worked nearby much longer than necessary, her eyes tracking aircraft specifications with unmistakable aviation comprehension. "Santos, you're staring again," Technical Sergeant Johnson mentioned during yesterday's shift. "Just observing work efficiency," Santos replied. But it was more than that. This morning's incident confirmed her suspicions. Most maintenance specialists would have apologized profusely when corrected by a fighter pilot. Rebecca Morrison had done neither submission nor defensiveness. She'd listened carefully, processed the aviation authority structure, and responded with calm professionalism that suggested experience managing difficult personalities in high-pressure flight situations. Her body language hadn't shown intimidation. If anything, she'd looked patient, like someone waiting for a student pilot to finish ground school. The secure pager buzzed again, its tone cutting through the hangar's constant background noise like an air traffic control alert. "What exactly is that noise?" Captain Collins demanded, his voice carrying across the maintenance bay. Rebecca's hand moved instinctively toward the device, then stopped. "I apologize, Captain. Air operations emergency contact. Air operations emergencies are handled through proper base channels." Collins gestured toward the official communication system. "Young lady, this is exactly the problem with civilian contractors and military aviation facilities. No understanding of proper flight protocols." But what Collins didn't know was that Rebecca Morrison had been conducting her own aviation investigation. As the general commanding all U.S., Air operations, she had access to flight safety reports and leadership evaluations for every air base under her jurisdiction. Nellis Air Force Base showed concerning patterns. Nothing dramatic, but subtle indicators suggesting inadequate maintenance respect and leadership issues affecting flight safety. Anonymous feedback mentioned feeling dismissed by certain pilots. Mission readiness scores declined consistently. Most troubling were bias reports about how different maintenance staff and support personnel were treated. So General Rebecca Morrison decided to investigate personally. But what they didn't realize about this skilled 34-year-old mechanic would change everything at Nellis Air Force Base. "Captain," Santos interjected carefully, "maybe we should keep flight discussions private. Maintenance staff sometimes overhear sensitive. Santos, she's a maintenance specialist. She torques bolts and changes hydraulic fluid. That's it." Collins gestured dismissively toward Rebecca, who continued preparing engine diagnostics with mechanical precision. "These civilian contractors sometimes forget their place in aviation hierarchy. Important to maintain proper boundaries." The pager buzzed a third time. Crisis escalation. Rebecca's athletic frame tensed slightly as she recognized the escalation pattern. Somewhere in American airspace, an aviation emergency was developing that required her immediate strategic assessment. The same assessment that had coordinated responses to terrorist air threats, international incidents, and combat air operations. "The problem with hiring attractive women for maintenance positions," Collins continued, his voice deliberately loud enough for Rebecca to hear, "is that they think their appearance entitles them to flight opinions. But this is military aviation. Beauty doesn't earn respect. Aeronautical competence does." Lieutenant Amy Phoenix Chen shifted uncomfortably. "Captain, perhaps we should lower our voices." "Should what? Pretend everyone's aviation opinion is equally valuable?" Collins warmed to his theme. "That's exactly the thinking that compromises flight safety. You need to understand that aviation hierarchy exists for a reason. Training matters. Education matters. Maintaining aircraft doesn't mean understanding flight science." Rebecca moved closer to their conversation, her movements carrying subtle authority that seemed at odds with the humble maintenance role Collins described. Technical Sergeant Wrench Johnson watched carefully. 22 years in aircraft maintenance had taught him to read people, and something about Rebecca's calm confidence suggested institutional knowledge beyond civilian contracting. "Sir," Johnson said quietly to Collins, "maybe we should keep it down. Some conversations. Johnson, she's a contractor. She maintains engines and cleans tools. That's it." Collins leaned back with satisfaction. "These civilian contractors sometimes forget their place. Important to maintain boundaries." But Johnson wasn't convinced. Military training created instincts hard to hide. The way Rebecca moved, anticipated needs, positioned herself to observe without seeming to, it suggested aviation knowledge beyond maintenance work. "Captain Collins," Master Sergeant Tank Williams joined their group. "Noticed you discussing work procedures loudly. Something we should address?" Collins considered carefully. "Professional development, Sergeant. Sometimes civilian contractors need clear guidance about aviation hierarchy and appropriate roles." "Maybe." Williams watched Rebecca efficiently manage 3 workstations while staying aware of every conversation. But people with that situational awareness usually learned it somewhere specific. What Williams didn't know was that Rebecca Morrison had been tracking concerning leadership patterns throughout her investigation. Collins represented exactly the type of bias that affected maintenance morale and flight safety. His dismissive attitude towards support personnel created the environment where critical maintenance insights were ignored. For 3 weeks, she'd observed how authority played out at squadron level, how respect was earned or demanded, how chain of command functioned when no stars watched from above. Now she was experiencing it firsthand. What came next would prove that assumptions about women in military aviation can be the most dangerous deception. That's when the Pentagon Air Command pager rang for the 4th time. The sound cut through the hangar like an emergency scramble alert. Not a cheerful personal chime, but the distinct priority tone of the nation's highest air operations command system. Every aviation professional in the maintenance area turned toward the sound. Rebecca froze mid-diagnostic, looking at the device that connected her to the Pentagon's Air Operations Crisis Management Center. "Ma'am," Collins called with full pilot authority, "I told you personal calls wait until break time. Turn that off immediately." Rebecca looked at the pager, ringing with Pentagon Air Operations priority rhythm. 12 years of aviation command experience warred with her undercover investigation. "Captain, with respect, this isn't personal." Rebecca's voice carried quiet confidence that made Santos pay closer attention. Collins's face reddened. "I don't care what kind of air operations call it is. You're contractor maintenance in a military aviation facility. When a pilot gives direction, you follow. Period." The hangar went quiet. Aviation personnel at nearby stations stopped their procedures, sensing confrontation. Rebecca's steady hands trembled slightly as she set down the diagnostic scanner. Inside her tool belt, the Pentagon Air Command pager held 12 years of command authority over aviation operations spanning global military airspace. "Captain Collins?" Santos tried. "Maybe she should—" "Santos, stay out of this." Collins's voice carried across the quiet hangar. "This is exactly what I meant. Civilian contractors who don't understand aviation hierarchy." Rebecca looked around, taking in dozens of aviation professionals witnessing this public confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable. Others enjoyed the drama. A few seemed to be taking mental notes about leadership behavior. The pager rang again, fifth cycle indicating air operations crisis escalation. "Ma'am," Collins continued with full captain authority, "you have 10 seconds to silence that device and return to duties, or I'll have you escorted out and your base clearance permanently revoked." "Captain?" Lieutenant Chen spoke quietly. "Maybe we should—" "Chen, I'm handling this. Everyone's about to see how you maintain discipline and respect in military aviation environments." Collins folded his arms. "Ma'am, I'm waiting." Rebecca looked at the pager. The secure device that had coordinated responses to national airspace emergencies advised the Joint Chiefs on aviation strategy and participated in decisions affecting global air operations. For 3 weeks, she'd observed how aviation leadership functioned at base level, how authority was exercised, respect earned or demanded, how flight hierarchy affected mission readiness when senior command thought no one was monitoring from above. Now she was experiencing it firsthand. "Captain Collins," she said quietly, "you're absolutely right about aviation hierarchy and the importance of following legitimate flight protocols from qualified pilots." Collins nodded with satisfaction. "Exactly. Now please turn off—" "But you might want to know," Rebecca continued, answering the pager, "who you're giving aviation orders to. General Morrison, Air Operations Command." That's when Captain Collins noticed something about the mechanic that made his pilot instincts scream danger. The silence was total and immediate. Even jet engine maintenance sounds seemed to pause as the words registered throughout the hangar. "General Morrison, we have a developing airspace crisis over the Pacific. Initial reports indicate unidentified aircraft violating restricted zones requiring your immediate aviation assessment." Rebecca's entire presence transformed. The blonde maintenance specialist disappeared, replaced by the commanding aviation authority of someone accustomed to decisions affecting national air security. "What's the timeline for my evaluation?" 15 minutes, ma'am. Pacific Fleet commanders are implementing air defense protocols, and we need your authorization before expanding intercept procedures." "Understood. Connect me to NORAD liaison immediately. I need all radar analysis reports and initial threat assessment data from the restricted airspace." While Rebecca received the classified aviation briefing, she observed the transformation around her. Captain Collins had gone completely still, his face draining of color in dawning aviation horror. Staff Sergeant Santos looked fascinated rather than shocked, as if diagnostic pieces were clicking into place. Other aviation personnel appeared to be experiencing various stages of professional disbelief, but Rebecca's primary focus was on the crisis thousands of miles away. "General Morrison, we're tracking potential incursion of 12 unidentified aircraft in restricted Pacific airspace. Flight patterns suggest coordinated military operation requiring immediate response assessment." Rebecca began pacing behind the maintenance station, her contractor uniform now completely at odds with the authority in her voice and the complexity of the aviation crisis she was managing. Current air defense status? DEFCON 3 for Pacific assets, ma'am. Fighter squadrons on alert status but no engagement authorization. Initial assessment suggests possible foreign military aircraft operating without proper identification. Recommendation: immediate escalation to full air defense readiness. All Pacific Air assets to intercept positions. No engagement unless aircraft enter sovereign airspace. And get me secure connection to Pacific Air Operations Commander. Full air defense readiness, yes ma'am. Secretary of Defense requesting your assessment on engagement protocols. Tell the Secretary that premature aggressive action could escalate reconnaissance into international incident. We demonstrate capability without appearing provocative. Have fighter squadrons establish visual contact while maintaining defensive positions. Captain Collins finally found his voice, barely a whisper. General? Rebecca held up one finger, indicating she needed to complete the air operations crisis call. Around the hangar, aviation personnel at other stations began realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Phones were quietly retrieved. Conversation stopped entirely. General Morrison, we're also receiving reports of increased cyber activity targeting Pacific air defense systems. Possible correlation with airspace violations? Almost certainly coordinated. This is testing our response patterns and air defense capabilities. Recommend immediate cyber defense notification and Protocol Alpha implementation for all Pacific Theater air communications. Protocol Alpha implementation, yes ma'am. Anything else? Hourly updates on both airspace and cyber situations. If either aircraft movements or cyber activity escalate, I need immediate notification. And get me secure line to Admiral Richardson at Pacific Command. We may need coordinated air-naval response. Understood, General. Hourly updates and secure connection to Admiral Richardson. Because the truth about Rebecca Morrison was even more incredible than any flight plan they'd ever seen. Rebecca ended the call and looked around the completely silent hangar. Every face was turned toward her, expressions ranging from aviation shock to professional awe to terrified recognition. She turned to Captain Collins, still staring with the expression of someone watching their aviation career disintegrate in real time. Captain Collins, I believe you had concerns about civilian contractors understanding aviation protocols? What followed was the most uncomfortable 40 minutes in Captain Collins's 7-year flight career. General Rebecca Morrison, still wearing her fitted maintenance coveralls, conducted an impromptu aviation leadership evaluation that would become legendary throughout the Air Force's pilot development program. Aviation professionals, she began, addressing the 8 personnel who remained at their stations while other maintenance staff quietly evacuated to give them privacy. What happened today wasn't an aviation accident. It was the predictable result of leadership attitudes I've been documenting at this facility. Staff Sergeant Santos leaned forward, her aviation training engaging. General, what exactly have you observed? Systematic patterns of discrimination based on appearance, gender, and perceived aviation status rather than actual competence. Troubling tendency to dismiss input from anyone considered lower in flight hierarchy. Rebecca pulled out a small aviation notebook. I've documented 22 incidents of pilots making flight safety decisions based on assumptions about maintenance staff, gender, or contractor status rather than demonstrated aviation capability. Captain Collins felt his flight career prospects evaporating. Ma'am, I never intended any aviation disrespect. Captain, aviation intentions matter less than flight safety impact. Pilot leadership effectiveness is measured by how behavior influences mission readiness, crew cooperation, and aviation outcomes. Rebecca flipped through her notes. Your interaction with me today was consistent with patterns I've observed in your aviation leadership style throughout these 3 weeks. She turned to Santos. Staff Sergeant Santos, you consistently questioned aviation assumptions and advocated for procedural verification. That's the critical thinking that creates effective aviation leadership. Santos felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. Being praised by the general commanding all air operations was career-enhancing. Being praised for questioning a captain's aviation authority in front of that general was potentially career-ending. Lieutenant Chen, you showed discomfort with today's conversation direction, but weren't willing to speak up when witnessing inappropriate treatment of someone you believed had no aviation authority to defend themselves. That's a leadership failure with serious flight safety consequences. Rebecca closed her notebook. Here's what happens next. Captain Collins, you'll report to Colonel Harrison's office at 1400 hours today. Your comments about maintenance staff, aviation competence, and appropriate treatment indicate immediate need for pilot leadership development and bias recognition training. Collins nodded numbly, calculating damage to his flight advancement potential. Staff Sergeant Santos, you'll join me for discussion about advanced aviation leadership opportunities. Your willingness to question conventional flight thinking indicates potential for strategic-level aviation responsibility. What happened next would restore every aviator's faith in true military leadership. All of you will participate in comprehensive base aviation climate assessment. This includes confidential input from all levels: maintenance staff, support personnel, pilots, and flight officers. Rebecca stood, her contractor clothes somehow failing to diminish the aviation command presence radiating from her athletic frame. Aviation professionals. Modern military flight operations require leaders who recognize aviation talent regardless of packaging. The ability to see beyond surface appearances and initial assumptions isn't political correctness. It's flight safety necessity. She looked directly at each aviation professional. Today, you had the opportunity to demonstrate those aviation qualities. Some succeeded, others failed dramatically. This morning's incident will become a case study in pilot leadership programs throughout the Air Force. Not because Captain Collins failed to recognize a general, but because he failed to treat another aviation professional with basic dignity and respect. Santos raised her hand. General, what changes do you recommend for Nellis? Nellis Air Force Base becomes a pilot program for inclusive aviation leadership development. We'll prove that flight safety improves when every aviation professional is valued for actual contributions rather than perceived status or appearance. The maintenance program will be expanded and formalized. Aviation expertise in specialized systems, flight safety advocacy, and mission coordination will be systematically integrated. Most importantly, we'll train pilots to recognize and develop aviation talent wherever they find it. As she walked toward the hangar exit, still wearing her maintenance coveralls but now carrying herself with unmistakable general authority, the remaining aviation staff sat in stunned silence, each contemplating how a simple engine diagnostic had fundamentally changed their understanding of aviation leadership, assumption, and the dangerous cost of underestimating aviation professionals based on appearance. 6 months later, the general in coveralls had become Air Force legend. Captain Collins received transfer to flight training at Randolph Air Force Base, effectively ending his combat pilot advancement possibilities. His evaluation included mandatory bias, recognition training, and ongoing supervision requirements. But the impact extended far beyond one pilot's career. Staff Sergeant Santos was promoted to Technical Sergeant ahead of schedule and assigned to Pentagon aviation planning, where her demonstrated ability to question flight assumptions proved invaluable in preventing 2 potential aviation safety crises. Lieutenant Chen received additional pilot leadership development focused on moral courage, the strength required to speak up when witnessing inappropriate treatment of aviation colleagues. The Nellis incident became the centerpiece of a new Air Force-wide program called Aviation Leadership Beyond Appearance. The program trained pilots to recognize flight talent regardless of gender, age, or maintenance status, proving that flight safety depended on seeing beyond surface aviation assumptions. General Rebecca Morrison was promoted to Deputy Air Operations Commander 6 months later, becoming the highest-ranking female aviation officer in Air Force history. Her promotion ceremony was held at Nellis Air Force Base, with over 400 aviation professionals in attendance. Aviation leadership requires the humility to recognize that flight wisdom can come from unexpected sources, she said during her speech. It requires the courage to question your own aviation biases, especially about the worth and capability of other flight professionals. The maintenance program at Nellis expanded to include former aviation executives, retired specialists, and experienced flight professionals whose civilian aviation expertise enhanced mission readiness in ways traditional military flight training sometimes couldn't address. But the most significant change was cultural. The incident sparked Air Force-wide conversations about aviation respect, assumption, and hidden potential in every flight professional. Pilots questioned their biases more carefully. Maintenance staff felt more valued. Missions experienced improved safety and greater aviation advocacy. The goal wasn't to embarrass anyone or prove points about hidden aviation identities, General Morrison explained to a military aviation leadership conference. The goal was creating aviation leaders who see flight professionals clearly, value contributions based on aviation merit rather than appearance, and understand that our flight strength comes from recognizing and developing aviation talent wherever we find it. Nellis Air Force Base's main hangar installed a small bronze plaque near the maintenance station. Aviation excellence is best measured not by how you treat those with authority over you, but by how you treat those who appear to have no flight power at all. Every day, aviation professionals sharing hangar space were reminded that everyone around them carried flight stories, experiences, and aviation capabilities that couldn't be judged by uniform, job title, or first aviation impression. Sometimes the person maintaining your aircraft commanded entire aviation systems. Sometimes the quiet observer had flight insights that could save thousands of lives. Sometimes the most powerful aviation leader in the hangar was the one everyone aeronautically underestimated. Thank you to everyone who shared where they're watching from. Pilots and aviation lovers from around the world represent. Your comments prove that respect for our military aviators spans every corner of the globe. In the skies and on the ground, true leadership always finds a way to soar. Until next time, remember, never underestimate the quiet strength that protects our freedom.